Kogonada's directorial debut, Columbus, stunned audiences for its mastery of the visual language. Incorporating his background as a visual essayist, Kogonada takes influence from auteurs like Ozu Yasujiro and Ingmar Bergman to deliver a style abundant with meticulous symmetry, thoughtful blocking, and profound landscape shots. Yet beyond its aesthetic and cinephilic homage lies something much deeper and distant, a careful withdrawal, a quiet reservation, an inscrutability. As scholar Vivian Huang writes in her book Surface Relations, inscrutability has been employed as a form of Orientalism towards the Asiatic figure, in which the encounter with the exotic other becomes conceptualized through distance and exteriority, thus producing a flat, homogenizing, and impenetrable surface. This inscrutability then transforms into a subjectivity, performed by the diasporic Asian figure in both coping with their illegibility in the Western eyes and perpetuating it in forms of silence, invisibility, and asociality. The Asian American, this then creates an empty, hollow exterior which finds difficulty expressing and understanding the incomprehensible affects of melancholia and grief. Huang, however, does not see this emptiness as a gap, but itself producing deep knowledge of navigating an illegible life world as a racialized other. Through Huang's scholarship, we can return to Columbus and specifically the character of Jin as performing an inscrutability which arises from a uniquely Asian American subjectivity and masculinity. This happens not only in a narrative sense but also stylistically. First, let's look at the camera. Columbus often uses long or extreme long shots, engulfing characters into large, expansive spaces, a detail which enhances the allure of the small city's architecture and design. As such, close-ups, particularly full frontal shots, are used sparingly, and interestingly enough are only afforded to the character of Casey. On the other hand, the camera stays far away from Jin, even at rare poignant scenes. Almost embodying Kogonada as an Asian American figure himself, the camera respects Jin's inscrutability and never threatens to get too close or too deep, acknowledging Jin as a flat, impenetrable surface without forcing illegibility. This happens with blocking too, with Jin frequently showing his back to the camera. Even in close conversations, Jin is facing away or to the side, making the minute details of his expressions inaccessible to us and those around him. It is interesting to note that this happens in both public and private spheres, indicating a sense of internalization at which Jin is never quite given the space to express. At times, mirrors offer a glimpse into an otherworldly space, deconstructing what is real and what is not, and thus confusing what Jin truly feels about his father and his illness. In other times, if the mirror is present in a scene, it does not choose Jin to illuminate. Again, this points to the film's ability to read Casey but not Jin, the former of whose interiority and exteriority remains intact throughout. For instance, Jin is able to read Casey, knowing when she is practicing her tour guide speech and when she is being genuine.
The idea here was that you walk in at street level. You don't have to climb any stairs. It's inviting. Sorry, what?
What are you doing?
What?
Who are you?
God, shut up. I'm just trying to tell you about this building.
Okay, stop with the tour guide mode for a second.
I'm not in a mode.
Though Casey is never quite able to do the same for Jin.
What?
Truth is, if I were in Korea, I'd be expected to be there when he died. And to express sorrow in the most dramatic fashion. There's this belief that if you're not there when a family member dies, you're not adequately grieving, your spirit will roam aimlessly and become a kikri, a ghost. Of course, my dad didn't believe in that shit. Still would be expected of me.
Do you believe in it?
No.
But if you were in Korea, you'd go along with it?
Probably.
So what? You don't want him to get better?
Maybe not.
Here, Jin is not only expressing frustration at his own cultural obligations, but also begrudgingly follows them, a contradiction which Casey reads as hypocrisy. Yet in fact, this contradiction is a very pillar of the Asian American male, who finds a certain pleasure in pain, a certain pride in the ideals of model minority and masculine ideals, and the same stroke that it brings about their destruction. Takeo Rivera reads this as a form of Asian American masochism, which becomes a mode of desubjectification and makes the subject more illegible, a quote, self-inflicted incoherence. Perhaps the same way Jin knowingly contradicts himself, he makes himself unknowable, both to Casey and himself. This desubjectification that Rivera draws from couples nicely with the frequent blocking of Jin's back and obstruction of his face, but it also illuminates the hidden figure of Jin's father. Despite being the crux of Jin's storyline, the reason for his indefinite stay at Columbus, the audience never truly sees or hears his father. He remains an ominous character, expressed through Ozu-like pillow shots of his clothes and chair, rather than any tangible form of personhood. Rather than an inability, the film views his father in this way as a refusal to acknowledge the Asian father figure, whose patriarchal values often conflict with and simultaneously morph the diasporic son.
Did he mention me at all?
We talked a little.
What did he say?
Jen,
Did he tell you that we haven't spoken in over a year?
you're all he has.
That has never been the case. He has his students, his work.
You're his son.
You've been watching too much Korean drama.
Here you go.
Thank you.
This is also why Jin processes the loss of his father differently than Casey processes leaving her mother, in that he's not losing his father, but more so a part of himself. In Freudian terms, this is an unconscious loss, which knows no bounds or end, intangible and persistent. For Anlin Cheng, who draws from Freud, this type of grief is very much racialized, as minorities have often dealt with inexpressible traumas of immigration, assimilation, and discrimination. As such, minorities have little to no access to articulated loss, producing racially melancholic subjects who do not know how to grieve. This inability to grieve prevents the resolution to Jin's story in the film. Unlike Casey, who decides to leave Columbus to pursue her architectural dreams, Jin remains in limbo, like a ghost who cannot rest, stuck in Columbus indefinitely, not knowing when his father will recover and conversely how long until he dies. As his future becomes undiscernible, he quite literally vanishes from existence. Huang rates this as a vanishing point, in which the Asian American disappears from view, while also becoming indexical paradoxically, two straight lines that should never touch but do. Through this disappearance and impossibility, does the Asian American disappear from sight and objectivity, and escapes it, existing without being seen nor understood. And so, Jin as the Asian American figure emerges through an inscrutable and unknowable being, of which is not empty, but rather profoundly full through the lack. There may not be a need to ever understand Jin's contradictions or be intimate to his interiority, the same way we do to Casey. But this rendering of illegibility, without discerning it, works to view the Asian American not simply through how they are molded by invisibility and discrimination, but also how they survive it and continue to live, even if on the margins of a book.
You got all this from marginalia.
Well, you know, he also filled all the blank pages in the back.